that's what winds up getting raided as far as this nationwide raid in 2012 called Operation Logjam.
Operation Logjam, yes.
Yeah, so and that took down a few places around here too. It was really all over the country. It was the first nationwide raid for synthetic drugs.
Wow. Oh wow, there's a map right there that show what is that where all the raids were?
Yeah, it was.
So if you zoom in on that map, is that so? Did these raids go down like simultaneously on all these locations?
Exactly.
Whoa.
And it wasn't like it wasn't like we're taking down one cartel. It was every sort of business like this that they could get their hands on.
A couple places actually a lot of places right around here in Tampa.
Yeah, a lot of Florida.
Fort
action.
Lauderdale, Los Angeles, Vegas, lots of like the New York area. Wow. So the southern, very tip border of Texas and Mexico. No way. So what ramped up this Operation Logjam? Like what? Like how did the DEA sort of like become? How did they become aware that this was a big problem, and how did it get on their radar and to the point where they had to implement this huge nationwide operation?
Like anything else, it's when it's becoming an issue in the streets or when they see it as one. Remember, we were talking about bath salts and spice. So bath salts were part of Operation Logjam too. So you have all of these instances of people freaking out on the street, hitting emergency rooms because they smoked this stuff and didn't know what it is, and they're losing their minds. And so it lent itself to a lot of pretty extreme headlines, and so it was becoming an issue in the consciousness, and so it built up to something where they felt they had to take it down. But it's very easy in a way. There was nothing they had to really infiltrate, if you think about it, because these things were these were storefronts. These weren't, you didn't need an undercover necessarily to go in and buy stuff that anyone could walk in and buy. You could walk in a police uniform and buy the stuff. They might look at you a little weird, but you could do it just like you could sell to anyone else. So it wasn't difficult in that sense. When you think of a law enforcement operation, it was just a lot of it. And now some of them might have been less upfront than others. And so just as a general description to say this was different in the way that everything under the Analog Act is different.
So they were arrested?
Not exactly. Not at all, actually. Oh. So let's go to Vegas.
Okay.
In the time of Operation Logjam, Burton and Ben weren't even actually out there. This is where we can maybe introduce a third character into this, who is Ryan Eaton. And Ryan is much younger than Burton and Ben. Ryan's closer to our age, maybe a little older. And so he was just basically a regular worker at Zen Sense. He was putting stickers on bags. He was working in Pensacola. And so to make a long story short, which again could have been its own chapter or book itself, Ryan winds up being the guy that they have out there working the warehouse in Vegas, making the spice there. He gets instructions from them of how to do it. Ryan doesn't have any sort of science degree. You don't need one. Any of us could have been sent out and do it. It's manual labor, basically. And he's whipping up these batches. He's sending them out back east to Pensacola, to Ben. He's in touch with him. He's living in a house with random guys. They have a pool. He's kind of just living a life out there. And I think it got sort of lonely for him and even boring, which he probably would have preferred to what wound up happening. So he goes to the warehouse one day, and this is happening in a very, very short time period, by the way. As I'm describing this, you might think of an operation that's getting built up over the course of months or even years, but he was out there for weeks, really. We're not talking months or even years, but they're making a lot of money in that time period, these batches that are getting sent out there. So Ryan goes to the warehouse one day and he sees flashing lights coming in behind him, and it's the DEA, and it's the day of Operation Logjam, because neighbors of the warehouse got suspicious of Ryan there. He's this big burly guy who's going in, and has like dust on him, and it's not clear what he's doing. They actually thought that he was growing weed. Again, going back to cannabis prohibition, and this is what made the neighbors suspicious. They wind up calling the cops. The cops wind up doing an operation, I guess you could call it. Again, he wasn't hiding exactly, even if he didn't have a sign saying, hey, I'm making spice in here. And so they wind up getting put on the list of places that are getting taken down in Operation Logjam. So it's actually just Ryan. And he winds up being let go that day. Burton and Ben aren't arrested that day. It's actually almost the opposite of being arrested. When Burton hears that Ryan was picked up by the cops, by the DEA, and that the Vegas warehouse was raided, Burton reaches out to law enforcement in Pensacola, to a cop he knew there who would borrow bongs from the Psychedelic Shack to do DARE presentations in the area. Again, file that under Burton, open with law enforcement. So Burton says, hey, I want to get in touch with whoever's in charge of the DEA here. He gets on the phone that night, Burton does, with a DEA agent, Claude Cozy, and Burton winds up inviting Cozy to the Pensacola facility to get a tour of it the next morning, where Cozy goes. He sees Zen-Sense workers bagging up stuff. He sees the safe where they're keeping the product, and he walks in. Burton gives him samples of the product, including one called Bizarro, which is part of where I get the title for the book. And Cozy goes off and he's on his way. He doesn't arrest them because, again, this isn't, if this was cocaine, Burton would not have been able to make that call. You wouldn't be able to arrest, to invite a law enforcement officer into your operation, at least not if you know that they're a cop. But because of the Analog Act, Cozy couldn't take them down that day. Cozy actually really wanted to. It wasn't like he was liking these guys. Cozy actually hates Burton Ritchie.
Really?
He hates him, yeah. That was one of the more memorable conversations I've had for this, was talking to Claude Cozy, who to his credit,
where's the hate come from?
I think they're really just opposite personalities. Cozy is the ultimate lawman. Burton's more of the freewheeling head shop owner in the area. And so Cozy is the arrest the drug guy during the day, 15 Budweisers at night. It's cultural, right? Burton is, I don't know if he's the opposite of that, but he's something very different from that. And so
so he was getting out ahead of it, inviting the DEA to his facility, showing them like, hey, this is what we're doing. We want to make sure everything's kosher here.
Yeah. And again, look, I don't want to editorialize it, right? Because there's a different way to look at it if you want to. You could call it getting ahead of it. You could call it making the best of it, right? I mean, getting ahead of it would have been calling him up before Logjam if you really, really want to go there, right? But it's, again, just to look at that other side of it, he was doing something that frankly would be insane to do with anything that was obviously an illegal drug. Because another thing I should say about their operation is, well, how did they know what was in it, right? You might be thinking, okay, they're ordering this stuff from China. How do they have the confidence? Even assuming the worst intentions on their part, how do you have the confidence to invite a DEA agent into your facility where you have people bagging stuff up that gets people high, that colloquially anyone would regard as a drug, whether that's a good thing, a bad thing, an illegal thing?
Yeah, that's like something out of a movie.
The reason he had that confidence is because they were third-party lab testing all of the chemicals that they got from China multiple times during the process. First, when they got the initial shipment to see what it was, and again, actually testing samples of the specific products they were going to sell before they went out to shops. So for something that was happening in a gray market, whatever there is to say about it, morally, whatever, it's just an incredible amount of quality control that's put into that you just don't see in any other sort of business that's that way. And so that part was just really incredible because he was able to give him a lab report. He was able to show him. Burton was able to hand Cozy the product and say, I know this is XLR11. And that was interesting because I remember you mentioned that chemical specifically before. I know this is it because that's what my lab test showed, and that is what the product that Burton handed Cozy wound up showing when the DEA lab test came back too. And they were not, this is back in 2012. No one was arrested for years after this.